I call Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's my pleasure, as it were, to take a call on the title and commencement provisions within this bill. Obviously, the commencement date in particular has been the source of robust debate in this House, and I will again reiterate Labor's position on that. But I want to start with first a very short reference to the title clause. Obviously, this bill, and there have been a few iterations that I've seen during the quite rushed drafting of this bill, but the title that we're working to now is the Returning Offenders Management and Information Bill. Mr Speaker, the notion of the word returning implies a distinct connection between the individual that this bill covers and their connection to New Zealand. And I think this comes to the heart of one of the debates, one of the issues that my colleague Kelvin Davis has been battling for many, many weeks now. And that is the notion that, yes, we are happy as a Labour Party to support a bill that monitors offenders who are legitimately being returned to New Zealand as New Zealand citizens. They are, for all intents and purposes, New Zealanders. They were born here, they have connection here, they have whānau here, they are New Zealanders. We are happy to support the monitoring of those individuals for offences that they've committed overseas and for their legitimate return to New Zealand. We do the same to other countries, let's be clear. If we have someone who has come into New Zealand, committed a crime, we will try them in New Zealand, we will have them serve their time in New Zealand, and then we will deport them to the place from which they have originally come, from which they reside, the place from where their citizenship exists and lies. But we must be absolutely clear that at this stage, this bill is covering more than those people. This bill will also be covering individuals who, by Australia's determination, are not Australians. And we refute that at the moment, the place they have chosen to draw that line is fair. If you said to any individual, is it fair that a person who was moved to a country like Australia when they were a baby, has been raised in that country, has worked their entire life in that country, has married a person from that country, has had children who are then raised in that country, is it fair to determine that because their first 7 months of life were in New Zealand, that they are a New Zealand citizen when they do not even identify themselves in that way? Now, our law books may define them in that manner, but if that individual doesn't even define themselves in that manner, is that fair? Secondly, where does the threshold sit for when you can therefore define that that person should be deported? Now, we know that we've had lots of discussion in this House as to whether or not it's been fair or not to say to the government that they should have moved more quickly. We maintain absolutely they should have, because the difference between the last 12 months and, say, the last 10 years is that last year the Australians changed their law. They changed their Immigration Act, which allowed them to move the threshold for deportation. Usually up here, a bar around the type of offences you had to commit before you were deported. They moved the bar so low that we have people with very, very, very minor offending now in the category for which they'll be deported. Add on top of that, minor offending, but also the fact that these people don't even see themselves as New Zealanders. So that is why I think the title of this bill, a title which talks about returning, the act of coming home. For some of these offenders, that will be true. They will have whānau here, they will have community here, they will, for all intents and purposes, be New Zealanders. But for a large chunk of individuals, they're not returning home. They're being moved to an entirely new country. And that makes the job for New Zealand that much more difficult, because the key to reintegrating an offender is their connection to community, is their connection to a place to reside, their ability to work, and so on. So I dispute the use of the word returning in the title, Mr Speaker, and I would argue that the reference to overseas offenders Information Management Bill would be a better reference. On to the commencement, Mr Chair, on to commencement.
Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Chair. On to the commencement clause, thank you. This has actually become a cornerstone of the debate in this House. Yes, we have said from the beginning, we agree with the need for this provision, this Act, to come in rapidly. And this commencement clause, as it states, it provides that the bill comes into force on the day in which it receives the royal assent. For those listening, that basically means as soon as we're done here debating it and the Queen's representative in New Zealand gives it a signature, it becomes law. It then is in force. So that'll be pretty quickly. That's about as quick as we ever make anything law in New Zealand. There's a good reason we do things slowly, usually, and that is to get things right. That is to get things right. But the issue here, Mr Chair, the issue is that Jamie Lee Ross, I'm speaking with the assumption that there are people out there who are watching beyond this chamber that might be interested in the way that we usually do things in this parliament. And usually, we would debate it first in this chamber, then we would send it to a select committee, and a select committee would ask the public to come and give their view. Now, that's not happening in this case. We're using a shortened period because the government says we need this law to be in place very, very quickly. We agree we need something in now. What we dispute is that we should have started this process a year ago. Had we started it a year ago, we could have given the public a say on this piece of law. We could have made sure that we didn't have errors in it, and we've identified a number of drafting errors through this debate. So what would we do as an alternative, given that we're here at this crossroads right now? Well, number one, we would keep this commencement clause, allow this bill to start immediately. But at the same time, we would have taken a duplicate of this bill, and at the same time that we would have passed one into law, we would have sent an exact copy of it to Select Committee for it to be reviewed properly, for it to be scrutinised properly. Then we would have made sure that this version expired after a year, and the version of this bill that had proper consideration would then replace it. We proposed that to the Minister. We thought it was a really elegant solution, but unfortunately that has been declined. What's our next option? Well, our next option is to look at when we review this piece of legislation. Now, at the moment, and I absolutely accept the intent of the Minister when she set out that she wanted the bill to be reviewed after 2 years. She didn't want it overlapping with election period, for it to be clear of that, for us to give proper consideration. I absolutely accept her rationale. Our view is that that's therefore an argument to make it even earlier. Give it a year. In 12 months' time, in next December, let's kick off a Select Committee review with urgency. Make it over the same time period that you would usually receive submissions on a bill, so nice and tight. Receive submissions, collect your data and evidence, review the operation of the bill. We could have it all done and dusted back in Parliament by, say, March the following year, well within any election period. So 12 months, we would say, would be the optimal. But if the government doesn't want to go 12 months, then we would also support 18 months. Generally, we want a shorter time period for review. So we will be supporting both of the Green Party's SOPs, which would bring that review period earlier than the 2 years that have been stipulated. Now, on this, I would acknowledge the Minister's absolute goodwill in engaging with other parties and trying to set an appropriate timeline for review. But I see no argument against 12 months. At the moment, we are receiving 25 offenders on average, and that's increasing, per month. We will have had we would have had hundreds by the time, inevitably, based on the stats we're seeing coming out of Australia, by the time we come to review this in 12 months. We will know how it is operating. In fact, I would wager if one case hits the headlines, if one monitoring case goes wrong and hits the headlines, we will be reviewing this legislation straight away. So why not make it 12 months, Mr Chair? So Labor will be supporting those SOPs. I encourage the House to make the review period 12 months. In lieu of that, I encourage them to make it 18 months. Either way, we've got to do something to make sure that this bill is operating properly, because it has been rushed.
Mr Chair.
Kelvin Davis.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Mr